is breaking news from CBS 2.
Hello, everyone. We're breaking into programming right now to bring you the sentence for Alderman Ed Burke, who was convicted several months ago for racketeering, bribery, attempted extortion. Judge Virginia Kendall is talking right now, and she's about to hand down the sentence.
She is, so we're listening into that. I also want to ask our crew in the back if they can kill our programming in our ears, please. It's been a long day that started at 10 a.m. today at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse, and right now the judge is going through what is her thought process as to how she is going to sentence the former alderman. And it's been a day of not only looking at the financial impact of what his schemes may be, but also the impact he made on people's lives. That is a bit of the conversation that the judge is walking through as we lead up to her eventual decision. Do we want to walk through what those punishment?
And we should also mention the former alderman also spoke today. He spoke a few minutes ago, and he apologized. He said he caused his family a lot of pain, but he didn't explicitly apologize for any of the crimes.
That's right. He just expressed sorrow at causing family and friends specifically any pain, and he did express regret over this being how his career has ended. And that is the first time we're seeing any sort of emotion from him, because it seems like even in court there wasn't a lot from here. We want to run through these charges right now. Jim?
Racketeering, conspiracy, federal program, bribery, attempted extortion, conspiracy to commit extortion using interstate for unlawful activity. Ed Burke is 80 years old. He was the longest serving Chicago alderman, more than 50 years, chairman of the powerful finance committee. He was essentially accused of putting the squeeze on people who needed things for him to do as a government official if they hired his law firm.
That's right. We have several crews at the courthouse bringing you team coverage, and we want to go to one of them. Our Sabrina Franza is there, along with our legal analyst, Irv Miller, to give us some context at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. Sabrina?
Hi, guys. It has been a long day here at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. We've been waiting for this sentencing, this decision to be made. It's now 6 months after this verdict came down, guilty on 13 of 14 counts. It's been a very emotional day for Ed Burke and his family. He noted in the few words that he said before the judge that he had a large presence of family and friends there with him in the courtroom. And this is the first time that we've heard from him since this case began. I want to bring over CBS 2 legal analyst Irv Miller. Irv, what are you expecting to happen? We've been hearing some changes on the sentencing guidelines. Formerly, the prosecution was asking for 10 years. It now seems like it might be a little bit less than that.
Well, they have to lower their estimates now because the judge lowered the sentencing guidelines after they had this long, boring argument this morning about the financial issues as to how much money was involved in these attempted bribes. So the fact that she lowered the guidelines, that means the government lowered their request for how much time he's supposed to serve. They went from about 10 to down to 8, and now we'll see what the judge comes up with. Obviously, the defense is hoping to get home confinement. That's not going to happen, but they're hoping for a lesser sentence. And I have to say something about what the alderman said to the judge. The judge was looking for him to accept responsibility for the crimes that he was convicted of. He didn't do that, as Jim and Marie just said. He basically said, this is painful for my family, but didn't mention the crimes that he was convicted of. That could have lowered his sentence in the eyes of the judge if he would have taken responsibility. He chose not to do that.
And Burke's defense team has made note of the many letters of support that he's received from some alderman organizations, clergy members even, and they've also taken note to his age and his health when they are asking the judge for a lesser sentence. Do you think that weighs at all on the decision today?
You know, typically I would say no, but as a former prosecutor and defense attorney, I have never seen a mitigation package put together so well. So many letters from not just politicians, but really decent people in the community that the alderman did good things for over his entire career. And that he has to play quite a big factor in this judge's sentencing decision, because he's not, he has obviously no criminal background, but he really was a good guy when it came to charitable things and helping other people. And I think that she's to take that into account in the sentence. I don't think she's going to give him anything near what the government is asking for, which is 8 years.
Right. The new sentencing guidelines were looking 6.5-ish to 8 years. Is it possible that the judge might actually sentence him to something less than that?
I believe she will. The sentencing guidelines used to be mandatory. A few years ago, the law changed. Now they're just advisory. The judge uses that so everybody across the country, basically all the federal courthouses are dealing with the same numbers, but the judge doesn't have to stick to those numbers. And when you have a defendant like this, he's a very unusual defendant. I mean, he did some great things as alderman, but he did some pretty bad things also. This is a public corruption case.
And we think about his health. They've talked a lot about the different conditions that he's been dealing with, his health history, and like I said before, his age. Does that have any sort of determining factors that can be taken into account at all when this sentencing happens, and if he were to head to the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Actually, the federal sentencing statute provides that the defendant's health should be a factor in sentencing, but the Bureau of Prisons has made arrangements for inmates like the alderman if he's sent to the penitentiary. They have prison hospitals around the country, and the one that's typically used out of this district, the Northern District of Illinois, is the Federal Medical Facility in Rochester, Minnesota, and that's where he could do his time in a prison hospital. So he's not going to be sent to a penitentiary where there's bars and what's your typical view of the Birdman of Alcatraz, so it's not going to happen that way.
What would a day in a life be like for someone who, like Burke, has been in power for so long and has had all the comforts of Chicago for so long, to be plucked out of what he's used to and then placed into, even if it were one of the penitentiaries that had more of a relaxed confinement procedure? What would a day in the life be like for him?
Well, I've had many clients that have been in these penitentiaries, and I have firsthand accounts from them of what it's like in the federal penitentiary. It's not like a state penitentiary at all. These inmates are given jobs. Inmate like Burke could be placed in the prison library, could be placed in a hospital facility to assist there. He's not going to be placed in a penitentiary setting where you have bars. The penitentiary that he would be going to, if it's not the hospital, it won't even have a wall around it. Nobody thinks that an inmate like Alderman Burke's going to walk out the door and escape. That's not going to happen. So, but they do either, Blagojevich, when he was in the penitentiary, they put him in the kitchen. So that's what it's like. I think they pay $150 an hour for the work that they do.
It's really, really interesting, and especially when you think about home confinement possibly being off the table. One of the arguments made was that if he were sentenced to home confinement, that wouldn't necessarily prevent him from acting similarly or using his power in any way in the past. Do you think that's a valid argument to make?
I don't think there's any chance, I'm sticking my neck out right now, but I don't think there's any chance that he's going to be sentenced to home confinement. There's a history about judges being lenient on public corruption cases and giving defendants probation. Years ago, when Alderman Verdoliak was sentenced, the first judge gave him probation. A public corruption case. Well, the government didn't like that. The government, while they can't appeal a not guilty, they can appeal a sentence. And they appealed Verdoliak's sentence to the 7th Circuit. And the 7th Circuit thought it was a totally inappropriate sentence to give him probation. They sent it back for resentencing in front of a separate, different judge. And that judge sent it to the penitentiary. And that was actually brought up in the sentencing hearing today, the Verdoliak case. The government wanted to make sure that the judge knew that they were not going to just do nothing if she gave him home confinement.
Irv, I'm hearing that we might have some questions. Jim Marie, did you have anything that you wanted to add as we wait for the actual sentencing to come down?
Yes. First, though, I just wanted to recap everyone. We have a producer who is in the courtroom right now. She's saying that Burke is sitting up very intently listening to U.S. District Judge Virginia Kendall as she continues to speak about weighing his personal good deeds throughout his long career as alderman with the crimes he is convicted of, and whether or not his good deeds should play in and how much they should play in into the sentencing.
And speaking to Irv's point, the judge said, never have I received so many letters in support. Mm-hmm. Never have I received so many letters lauding his charity, his kindness, his goodness. Irv, I do want to ask you a question. The former alderman spoke, as we noted a few minutes ago. Were you surprised?
I was surprised. It's one of those things that if you're going to say something that's meaningful for this sentence. In other words, Judge, I'm sorry, I did wrong. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the people of the city of Chicago. But just to say, well, I hurt my family, I think he would have been better off just to say respectfully, Judge, no, thank you for the opportunity.
Irv, if I may, if you have me, I'd like you to speak to us about the length of this hearing today. Some people might expect that sentencing hearing to be just a few quick discussion points and then a decision, but we're approaching more than 5 hours now. Does that surprise you at all? How common is this length of time?
Marie, did you see how many lawyers were sitting at each one of the tables? Lawyers like to talk.
Yeah.
There was a lot to say. One of the big issues today, this morning, in computing the guidelines, they had to compute monetary issues, and the defense called a couple of financial experts that took forever. Probably the most boring testimony I've heard in ages. But it paid off because the judge, after hearing that testimony, lowered the guideline numbers. They went from 10 years down to 6 to 8 years. So that took a lot of time. Once the arguments got started, the government was pretty quick. They talked about the issues of deterrence. We can't have public corruption. This has to send a message to everybody else who's running for office or holding office that they don't do the same thing. So that took pretty quick amount of time. But then the defense attorneys decided to read some of these 200 to 300 letters that we've been talking about. Some of them were pretty lengthy. And frankly, the letters, I think, made a difference. They made a difference to me when I read them, even as a former prosecutor. He had to have an effect on the judge and her decision. So I think that will pay off as soon as we hear what these numbers are that the judge is about to come up with.
And Irv, could you explain, each count has its own sentencing. For those that are listening in, how does that work and how does that add up for someone like Burke?
Okay, so there's 13 counts. She'll give a sentence on each one of the 13 counts. There are no mandatory minimum sentences on any of these counts. She could give them 1 day if she wanted to. Some of the charges, like count 1, the racketeering charge, has a 20-year max, some are 10-year max, and some are 5-year max. So she'll go through each one of these counts and put in a number not to exceed the max on each one of the counts, and they will all run concurrent. That means at the same time. So the important number is going to be count 1, which is the racketeering count, which has the 20-year max. We'll get a sense of what the other numbers are going to be, but that's the first one we hear is going to be the important one.
And then when we think about adding all of those up together and how much time somebody would actually need to serve before they can possibly return home to their family in any sort of way, how does that work in a federal case like this one?
By statute, a federal inmate does 85% of the amount of time the judge gives him. So let's say she gives him 20 years. He will only do 85% of the 20 years. In addition to getting the last 6 months off, they usually send somebody to a halfway house somewhere in the city that they live in before they are allowed to re-enter back into society. But 85% is by statute.
And guys, just to give you some context too, we've been in the courtroom in the lobby of the courthouse rather for hours, and since we've been here, the exterior of the Dirksen Federal Courthouse has been locked. There's a larger security presence than there was, especially at 9 o'clock this morning. Irv, why do you think they're doing that, especially as we get so close to an actual sentencing coming down? Well,
I think they learned from the past of what it could be like when a convicted, high-profile defendant walks out the front door of a courtroom, and it's a mess. I mean, everybody's trying to stick a microphone or a minicam in their face, and it was crazy when Blagojevich went through the media line out. So I think they're going to take everybody out the back way this time, so the same thing doesn't happen.
And we're not going to be seeing, if he is sentenced to jail time, the former alderman walking out and heading straight to penitentiary, correct?
That's right. If she sends him, imposes a penitentiary sentence, she will then say, I'm going to let you stay out on your own recognizance, and I will order that you report to the Federal Bureau of Prisons on a particular date, probably October, sometime in October or November. She does not designate the penitentiary. Between now and the date she sets, the Bureau of Prisons will determine where he should be sent. They have a formula, Federal Prison Hospital, low, medium, or high security, and they'll send him a letter. And you are to report to that particular facility that on the day that the judge set. And that's the day that he actually walks into the federal penitentiary. As I said, probably sometime in October or November.
It's really, really tense. It's getting more and more tense down here as we wait for that sentencing to come down. But Jim Marie, did you have anything to add as we're waiting to hear more?
And Irv, Judge Kendall has not yet told us what the punishment is going to be, but she has been speaking for quite a while now. And one of the things that she said about former Alderman Burke. He is no longer in office. He is no longer practicing law. It's a terrible fall from the place you were in to be here today. I don't think Mr. Burke will commit another crime in his 81st year.
Something else they ran through again were the health issues that he's facing. His defense team mentioned a history of prostate cancer, some ongoing skin cancer issues, as well as a stroke that Burke had in 2019. But the judge referenced that she is trying to think about those things, none of which are direct threats to his health as of right now, but how that impacts how he serves time at the age of 80 and advanced. So that's something that she's weighing. She also said that earlier today, which I think is worth mentioning, the impact of what this sentence says to other public officials in Chicago, certainly not the first time. If you'll stay with us here on the stream on CBS Chicago, we are going to bring in our viewers on CBS Network.
This is breaking news from CBS 2.
Good afternoon. I'm Marisa Vader here with Jim Williams, bringing you the decision in the case of former powerful Alderman Ed Burke. He has been sentenced, and we're getting that information right now as we speak.
It's coming in. The producers are talking to us now. $200,000 fine on count one. $150,000 on each of the remaining 12 counts, for a total of $2 million that he has to pay.
We're hearing from the judge that this is Virginia Kendall. She was looking for some sort of punishment that would give the public some sort of seeing that justice is served as far as the 13 counts that the former alderman was facing. There were a lot of concerns about whether or not he would serve any sort of jail time. Now we are seeing
Here's
this
incarceration.
Okay.
Period of incarceration wanted by government is too onerous, and so is no detention at all. This is what Irv has been telling us, our legal analyst, Irv Miller. My sentence will be 24 months plus the fine, and then 1 year supervised release. 2 years in prison, plus a $2 million fine.
A lot of the debate over the age of Alderman Ed Burke, former Alderman Ed Burke, 80 years old. His team of lawyers was asking that he only serve house arrest, but we had heard from our experts that he was going to serve some sort of time in penitentiary, and now we hear that that is the case. That's 2 years in penitentiary and then 1 year supervised, plus the $2 million fine.
This was a long hearing today, more than 5 hours. We heard from Burke's defense attorneys who said that this is a man who did a lot of wonderful things in his career and wonderful things for people. And the judge noted that she had never received so many letters of support from someone on trial.
So again, a little bit of added context here. The federal prosecutors were asking for somewhere between 6 to 8 years. The judge has decided 2. I wonder if his team is going to consider that a win. We hope to hear from them at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse a little bit later as this decision comes down.
And we want to remind you that shortly before Ed Burke's 80th birthday in December, he was convicted of racketeering, bribery, and attempted extortion. Our legal analyst, Irv Miller, is standing by the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. Irv, what's your reaction to this?
I have to say it. I predicted 24 months. I predicted 18 to 24 months. I think that's the appropriate sentence based upon the crime, what he committed, his age, his health, but most importantly, the mitigation that was provided, all those letters, all the good things that the alderman has done throughout his life, even take into account that this is a public corruption case. I think this is absolutely the right sentence.
The prosecutor said, this is a quote, public officials in the city and state need to understand that if they engage in corruption, they will serve a stiff sentence regardless of age. We've heard that many, many times, though, haven't we, Irv, after these cases?
Jim, you and I have seen way too many of these cases. I heard somebody say earlier today that there have been 40 aldermen that have been sentenced to penitentiaries for public corruption. I don't know if that's true, but it sure does sound right, doesn't it?
That's a high number. Irv, if I can, and our thanks to Sabrina Franza, who's there with you, handing that microphone to you. The impact of letters, the judge again saying that this was some of the most letters she's ever seen, the emotional ties here of the good Burke has done. Is it possible after all this and all this investigation that it came down to the personal touch that he made in the more than 50 years as alderman, and that had such a bigger impact on the small amount of time that encompassed the charges that he was facing here, and that weighing in the justice system is what we see now with that sentence much lower than what federal prosecutors asked for?
Those letters absolutely made probably the most important aspect of the information that was provided to the judge at this sentencing hearing. There's no way that a judge could have ignored them. There's no way a judge couldn't seriously say, hey, this guy, a lot of good things about this guy. He committed a crime and he's going to pay the price, but boy, he did a lot of charitable things for a lot of people. And as a former prosecutor, I thought he should pay the price for the crimes that he was convicted of. But then I read these letters and I said, you know what? There's got to be a little mercy in there for the guy. So it totally switched the belief that I had coming into today, and I suspect the judge had the same reaction.
We want to remind our viewers that Ed Burke was accused of using his public office, the powerful perch of chairman of the Finance Committee in the Chicago City Council, alderman for more than 50 years, to pressure people who were seeking public support for projects to use his law firm.
If I can bring back Irv, if we're changing our coverage, there was a moment that the judge talked about weighing the erosion of a citizen's faith in government. As you referenced, that is something that we have seen time and time again with, unfortunately, with Illinois and Chicago's public officials that have been in that same situation there at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. Irv, for novices who don't necessarily understand the entire legal system here or the impact that this sentence has, can you put it into context as to how these 24 months, the year on probation, and the $2 million does weigh out or weigh against a citizen's faith in their government and the people that they elect to do the job of taking care of the city?
You know, the citizens of Chicago, unfortunately, every couple of years we go through the same process over and over again. I can't tell you now how many times I've actually stood in this very spot talking to you guys about the same thing, public corruption. And, you know, you think that, when a person gets elected, the first thing they're going to say is, boy, maybe I should learn from the mistakes that my predecessors have made. But it doesn't seem to work out that way. It's a never-ending battle, and frankly, I think one of the problems is the way that city government is set up. You know, aldermen in the city of Chicago, they're not just legislators, but they have executive duty. They have control over permits in their wards, and housing develops in the ward. They're not just legislatures, and I think that's an area that leads into potential corrupt activities when you have to have like fundraising events, and people who are giving you money in your fundraising events are ones that are seeking permits from you. It's just a kind of a conflict of interest, in my opinion.
Irv, forgive us, we're just getting some new information. We understand that the judge has set a surrender date of September 23rd, and with that, court has ended, and we are working on trying to get a shot as the former alderman leaves court today on his own recognizance.
And I would be interested to hear whether or not Irv agrees with me. I would, Ed Burke has always been quite the talker on the floor of the city council, known for his long speeches about Chicago history and paying tribute to fallen police officers and firefighters. But I would be surprised if he would speak to the press after this. How about you, Irv?
I'm not going to be surprised if he speaks. I hate to disagree with you because I totally respect your opinion on things, but he's the kind of guy that I don't think that he could see a camera and a microphone and not play to the camera and speak into the microphone. I don't think he's going to admit his guilt. I don't think he's going to say anything that will hurt him in his appeal. But I do think he may want to thank his lawyers. I think that would be nice. Thank the system for giving him a fair trial. But you're not going to hear, accept responsibility. Those magic words in the federal court are the magic words in the federal courthouse. And he's not going to say that down here, and he didn't say it upstairs either.
Okay. Irvin, Sabrina, Franza, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight. We'll come back to you shortly, but we now want to get to Dick Simpson, former alderman and UIC professor, who is joining us to share a reaction to this sentence. Dick, if we can ask your thoughts on the 24 months in penitentiary, 1-year probation, and that $2 million fine.
I think it's fairly appropriate because of Burke's age and a lot of the other matters. It was really important, however, that the judge give jail time. That's been the pattern of nearly all of the corruption cases. Burke is the 40th alderman to be convicted of corruption since 1976, and there have been 2,100 officials in the state of Illinois. The judges really want to try and do what they can to discourage future corruption cases.
Dick, you served with Ed Burke in the Chicago City Council. He spanned 54 years there. He was always, I'm sure you had any number of disagreements with him on policy and other matters, but he was, I think, by all accounts, a very savvy guy. Are you surprised this happened to him, that he got caught in this?
I think he was in a natural conflict. He was trying to get business for his law firm. And so he wasn't asking generally for someone to give him, like most aldermen do, $500 for a zoning change. He was looking for a much bigger payout through hiring his legal firm to do property tax assessment. And he simply got sloppy. He kept getting involved with major corporations, major individuals who wanted his favor on what happened in the city council floor. And even though he was careful to recuse himself from many final votes, he did play an important role in passing their legislation.
Dick, there was so much attention on those schemes, but then today we saw so much attention on the hundreds of letters in support of him, sharing anecdotes like efforts to build playgrounds for people
paying for funerals,
who live their lives in wheelchairs, paying for funerals, just seeking out people to give to. That clearly made such an impression on the judge. Are you surprised that so many people, including some big names, wrote these letters speaking to Burke's character?
Well, Burke was very thoughtful. When I lost my congressional race in 1992 to Dan Rostenkowski, he was the only public official who reached out and offered condolences because he had lost his race for state's attorney, and he understood what a problem it was. So he had a very human side. He was also, sort of off the floor, very congenial if you knew him. So I think that came through in the letters to the judge, and it may have influenced the judge's final decision as to the sentence that he was given. He could have been given 10 years, or at least 8.5, the judge said, by the guidelines. 10 years was what the prosecution asked for, and the judge simply wanted to make sure there was jail time and there was a penalty for what he did.
Former Alderman and UIC Professor Dick Simpson, who served with Ed Burke, thanks for your insight always.
Glad to do it.
Thank you, Dave. We now want to check in with our Chris Tye. He was in the courtroom today, and he's been following this case throughout, so we'll go to him in just 1 second. But if we can, let's do a bit of a reset to let people know. We've been sitting in and listening in to the sentencing hearing since 10 o'clock this morning. Former Alderman Ed Burke, charged of using his powers at City Hall to then get personal benefit from his law firm. He had 13 counts to be sentenced for today, and there were many factors taken into account, including, again, the good deeds he did, his health at the age of 80, and what that sentence might look like.
CBS 2's Chris Tye, our political reporter, has covered every day of the trial. Chris, your reaction, and what was the atmosphere like inside the courtroom?
No other way to put it. It was deathly silent. Judge Virginia Kendall started by going very aggressively at how Ed Burke's actions over those years from 2016 to 2018 sort of chipped away at the fabric and the trust that citizens have in government. But then she took a pretty hard right turn and went through the hundreds of letters, or at least referencing them in general, talking about the man Ed Burke is, the man who has helped so many people, some for political gain possibly, but others others that had no political repercussions. She said he's a man that really stands out from other defendants that she's ever had to sentence. The number of people in court, the number of people that have reached out to her office tell a very different story. So she said she was put in a very difficult position, frankly. On one hand, you have these acts that were recorded on tape, and on the other, a lifetime of pretty amazing, in her words, public service. So she said what we have to do here is figure out what is just but doesn't go over the line. So as you guys have been talking about, the sentence comes in at 24 months. He will turn himself in he will turn himself into authorities in mid-September. That $2 million fine, which she says is very stiff in these terms, is something that he will have to pay between now and then. She said to him, you can appeal my sentencing here. Of course, that is something that is available to all defendants. They have about 90 days to do that. Those systems will begin in very short order. Ed Burke spoke to the judge just moments before this sentencing came down. He did not take ownership of the crimes that he's been convicted of, but said he was sorry in general, sorry for what he's put his family and his friends through. The judge talked about how on one hand you have a man recorded on tape saying some very abhorrent things, but on the other, the vouching of his personality by way of clergy, leaders of Misericordia, former heads of police agencies, all speak to the larger man. I want to tell you that I'm kind of taking a look just over the camera bay here because Burke's attorneys, who have not spoken since all of this unfolded, since the sentence came down back in December, and his team has spoken very tight-lipped ways since this all began over 6 years ago when the feds raided his offices. Really, we have not heard a lot from them. His attorney told me about 2 hours ago that they expect to talk, and it's very possible that Ed Burke himself will talk today in front of cameras. So we will wait to see, Jim and Marie, how all of that plays out here. But again, a very tense couple of moments up there in the court. There's a lot of people saying, obviously the U.S. Attorney's Office saying it should have been 10 years, Burke's team wanting it to be home confinement. In the end, it's 24 months and $2 million.
Our thanks to Chris Ty at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse.
What a fall from the longest-serving Chicago alderman in the city's history, former powerful chair of the Finance Committee, 2 years in prison.
Stay with us here on CBS News Chicago. We are waiting to see the former alderman leave the courthouse. We'll have that video streaming on CBS News Chicago. You can find it on our website, and we'll see you there. We'll send you back to programming now.
This has been breaking news from
farmers and the weather.
Weather's always been a challenge.
I think I have 5 different weather apps on my phone, and I probably check them over a dozen times a day.
Climate change and the price of doing business.
The changes in the weather are definitely challenges to farm income.
It seems that it's getting more extreme.
What climate change is costing farmers and what it could ultimately cost you. Wednesday on CBS 2 News at 10.